Sign the papers, I told myself. Just sign them and walk away. That was 3 years ago, standing in a lawyer's office on a Tuesday afternoon in November, watching my brother slide a document across the table like he was doing me a favor. The family home in Mississauga. Our grandmother's house. The one she left to both of us equally when she passed in 2019. He wanted me to transfer my half to him. Said he needed it more. Said I was doing well for myself. Didn't I have a good job? Wasn't I the responsible one? Hadn't I always been fine on my own? I signed nothing that day, but I am getting ahead of myself. My name is not important. What is important is that I am the older daughter, the one who put herself through university at McMaster, while working 30 hours a week at a grocery store on Dundas. The one who graduated with no debt because I refused to let debt follow me the way everything else in my family seemed to. I took a position at a mid-size logistics company in Hamilton, worked my way into a project coordinator role, and by 29 I had a decent savings account, a small condo I was renting out, and a credit score that my mother once described, without irony, as the most impressive thing about you. My brother is 4 years younger than me. His name, for the purposes of this story, is my brother, because that is all he ever was to me, a title, a role, a source of obligation. He dropped out of college after 1 semester. He moved back home. He worked occasionally, between periods of not working. He borrowed money from our parents regularly, and when our parents ran dry, he borrowed from our grandmother, and when our grandmother passed, he began to look at me. My mother enabled all of it. That is the word, enabled. She would call me on Sunday evenings, not to ask how I was, but to soften me up before making a request on his behalf. She was good at it. Decades of practice. She knew exactly how to frame things. Not your brother needs money, but the family is going through a rough patch. Not he made another bad decision, but he just needs a little support right now. As if support were something I had in unlimited supply, and he had a right to draw from whenever the account ran low. I was the mule. He was the one they worried about. I want to be fair. There were good years, or at least years that felt good because I did not yet understand the pattern. When I was a teenager, I genuinely looked up to my brother in certain ways. He was funny. He could charm anyone in a room. When my parents had people over for dinner, he was the one who made everyone laugh, and I was the one in the kitchen refilling the bread basket. I used to think that was just our dynamic, our natural roles. It took me a long time to understand that it had been assigned to us, not chosen. By the time I was 27, I had started to see it clearly. The calls came more frequently. My mother would mention that my brother's rent was overdue. She would mention it casually, the way you mentioned that it might rain later. And I would transfer money, because the alternative was a 2-hour conversation about family loyalty and what our grandmother would have wanted and how I had been given so much. And wasn't it only fair? I transferred money 11 times in 18 months. I know because I tracked every one of them in a spreadsheet I created after the 7th transfer, when I realized this was not going to stop on its own. $43,000 over 4 years, if you count everything. The loans that were never repaid. The emergency that turned out to be a gaming laptop. The rent that went, I later found out, partly toward a trip to Vegas he did not mention to anyone. I stopped transferring after the $43,000. I told my mother no. The first time I said it, she went quiet on the phone for a long moment and then said, very softly, that she was disappointed in me. That word landed the way she intended it to. I felt it for days. The second time I said no, she cried. The third time she did not call me for 3 weeks. And when she finally did, she talked about my brother's situation for 40 minutes without once asking how I was doing. I went to a therapist during this period. I will not say much about it except that it helped, and that one of the most useful things my therapist said to me was this: the fact that someone is struggling does not automatically make you responsible for fixing them. I wrote that down. I read it again on difficult days. Then our grandmother's estate was finalized, and the house came into the picture. It was a semi-detached on a quiet street in Mississauga. Nothing grand, but in the current market it appraised at just under $600,000. Our grandmother had been clear in her will. Equal shares between me and my brother, to be dealt with as we mutually agreed, whether sold and split, rented out together, or one buying out the other at fair market value. I was open to any of those options. I said so at the first family meeting, which my mother organized and which felt less like a family meeting and more like a negotiation where only one side had prepared. My brother wanted to live in the house. He wanted me to transfer my half to him. He did not have money to buy me out. He did not propose a payment plan with actual numbers. He did not offer anything in writing. What he offered was the suggestion that this would be good for the family, and that I, having a condo of my own, did not need a second property, and that he, having nothing, needed it more than I did. My mother nodded throughout. I said I would think about it. I thought about it for approximately 48 hours, and my conclusion was no. When I communicated this, through a brief and carefully worded email, my brother called me selfish. My mother called me cold. There was a family dinner I was not invited to. There were text messages from an aunt on my mother's side who I had not spoken to in 2 years, suddenly very concerned about family unity. I recognized the campaign for what it was. I did not respond to any of it. What I did instead was call a real estate lawyer. Her name was Patricia, and she had handled estate files for 20 years, and she was the most efficient person I have ever spoken to in my life. I explained the situation. She explained my options. We discussed what it would mean to list the property, what it would mean to rent it, what protections I had as a co-owner, and what I needed to do to protect my interests going forward. One of the things she mentioned, almost in passing, was that a co-owner could not sell, mortgage, or refinance a jointly held property without the consent of both owners. I filed that information away. I told Patricia I wanted to list the property for sale. She advised me that my brother, as co-owner, would need to consent, or the sale would require a court order. She said that if he refused to cooperate, we could pursue a partition application, which is a legal process in Ontario that compels the sale of a jointly held property when co-owners cannot agree. It is not fast. It is not cheap, but it is available. I said I understood. I also said that before we went down that road, I wanted to put something else in place. I had been doing my research. Quietly, the way I do everything important without announcing it, without asking permission, without giving anyone the opportunity to talk me out of it. My brother, I had learned through a conversation I was not supposed to overhear at Christmas 2 years prior, had been trying to use the house as collateral for a loan. He had spoken to someone at a private lending company. He had not told me. He had not told our mother, or if he had, she had not told me. He had apparently been told he could not proceed without my signature on the consent forms, and had decided, based on what I overheard, that he would get my signature one way or another. I want you to understand what that meant. He was planning to borrow against a property I half-owned, without my knowledge, and find a way to make me sign documents I did not understand, under conditions I had not agreed to. I called Patricia the next morning. She confirmed what I suspected. Without my consent, he could not encumber my interest, but she also said that in certain situations, with the right pressure and the right paperwork presented the right way, people sign things they should not sign. She was not alarmist about it. She was simply thorough. We put a notation on title that same week. It was a simple thing, an administrative step that flagged my interest and created a requirement for independent legal advice before any document affecting my share could be executed. It would not stop him from trying, but it would stop anything from going through without my full and informed knowledge. Then I waited. It took 4 months. The call came on a Saturday morning in March. My mother. She said she needed to see me, that it was important, that there was something we needed to discuss as a family. Her voice had the particular quality it gets when she has rehearsed what she is going to say. I recognized it immediately. I drove to the house. My brother was already there. There was a man I did not recognize sitting at the kitchen table with a folder of documents in front of him. My mother introduced him as a financial advisor. He was not a financial advisor. He was a mortgage broker, affiliated with a private lending company, and the documents in the folder were consent forms for a $240,000 second mortgage on the Mississauga property. My brother explained that he needed capital to start a business. He had a plan, he said. He had an opportunity. He just needed the initial funding, and the house was the logical place to get it, and since we were family, this should not be a big deal. My mother looked at me with an expression I can only describe as carefully calibrated hope. The man with the folder smiled and slid the documents toward me. I looked at the papers for a long moment. I looked at my brother. I looked at my mother. I looked at the man with the folder who was still smiling. Then I said, I am going to need to have these reviewed by my lawyer before I sign anything. The smile on the broker's face did not disappear. It recalibrated. My brother said that wasn't necessary. It was a simple document. It would only take a minute. My mother said that Patricia, I had mentioned my lawyer by name once, months ago, and my mother had filed it away that Patricia would just complicate things, that this was a family matter. I said that was exactly why I needed independent legal advice, because it was a family matter. I took photos of every page of the documents with my phone. I thanked the broker for his time. I said I would be in touch. I drove home and called Patricia. She reviewed the documents the following Monday. The terms were predatory. The interest rate was structured to balloon significantly after the first year. The repayment schedule was aggressive. The personal guarantee clause, buried on page 11, would have made both co-owners jointly and severally liable for the full amount, meaning that if my brother defaulted, which Patricia noted was a foreseeable outcome given the terms, the lender could pursue me personally for the entire $240,000. There was also a clause, on page 14, that I almost missed. A default provision that allowed the lender to move toward forced sale of the property within 90 days of a missed payment. In other words, if I had signed, and my brother had defaulted, which he would have, I knew this the way I know my own name. I would have lost my half of the house, my credit, and potentially faced a lawsuit for a debt I did not create. Patricia sent me a written summary. I read it 3 times. Then I called the real estate agent I had already, quietly, reached out to 6 weeks earlier. Her name was Sandra. She had sold 3 properties on that street. She knew the neighborhood. She had a buyer who had been waiting for something to come up in that area for 8 months. I told Sandra I was ready to proceed with a partition application if necessary, but that I wanted her to be ready to list the moment I had authority to do so. I sent my brother a formal letter through Patricia's office. It was brief. It outlined my position as co-owner. It noted that I had reviewed the proposed mortgage documents and declined to consent. It stated that I was prepared to proceed with a court-ordered partition sale under the Partition Act if we could not reach a mutually agreeable resolution within 30 days, and that I had already retained counsel and a real estate agent for this purpose. The 30 days passed. My brother did not respond to the letter. My mother called me 4 times. I did not answer. She left voicemails. The first was upset. The second was upset and tearful. The third was calm in a way that felt more frightening than the upset. The fourth was a long silence followed by the sound of her setting the phone down. On day 31, Patricia filed the partition application. My brother retained a lawyer. I know because Patricia received correspondence from that lawyer 9 days after the filing. The correspondence indicated that my brother was willing to consent to a sale, provided that certain expenses he claimed to have paid on the property over the past 3 years be credited against his share of the proceeds. Patricia reviewed his claimed expenses. Some were legitimate. He had paid property tax twice when our grandmother was ill and could not manage it herself. Those we agreed to credit. The rest maintenance he claimed to have performed. Utilities he said he had covered could not be substantiated. We offered to credit the property tax. He accepted. The house sold in 11 days. Sandra's waiting buyer made an offer on day 2 of the listing. It closed in 30 days. After expenses, legal fees, the agreed property tax credit, and the real estate commission, my share of the proceeds came to $268,000. It was deposited into my account on a Thursday afternoon. I was at my desk at work when the notification came through on my banking app. I put my phone face down on the desk and stared at my monitor for a moment. Then I went to the kitchen and made a cup of tea and stood by the window looking out at the parking lot. I felt nothing dramatic, no rush of victory, no particular satisfaction, just a quiet, clean sense of something being finished. My mother called that evening. I answered this time. She said that what I had done had torn the family apart. She said that my brother had nothing now, and that I had everything, and that I should be ashamed of myself. She said our grandmother would be devastated. She said I had always been cold, that I had always cared more about money than about people, that I had chosen a number over my own family. I let her finish. Then I said, I didn't tear anything apart. I just stopped letting myself be the foundation. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said I was selfish and she hung up. I have not spoken to my brother since the sale closed. I have spoken to my mother twice, briefly, about unrelated things. The conversations were polite, in the way that conversations are polite when both people know that something has been settled, and neither one wants to reopen it. The $268,000 is invested. Part of it went into a TFSA. Part of it went into a down payment on a small investment property in Hamilton, which I own outright in my name alone, with no co-owners, no family arrangements, no handshake agreements, and no one's signature required but mine. My brother, I am told, moved back in with my mother. I am told he is working now, at least part-time. I hope that is true. I genuinely do. I do not wish him harm. I simply no longer wish him anything that requires something from me. My therapist asked me once whether I felt guilty. I thought about it honestly before answering. I said, not for the outcome, only for how long it took me to stop believing that loving someone meant absorbing their consequences indefinitely. She wrote something in her notebook. I did not ask what. I still have the spreadsheet. $43,000 over 4 years, plus the $240,000 I would have been liable for if I had signed those papers in March. That is $283,000 of other people's decisions that nearly became my debt. Instead, I walked away with $268,000 in a clean title. I did not ruin anyone. I simply stopped being the person everyone assumed would cover the cost.